Welcome to the Happiness Matters podcast with me, your coach, Julia Seal, where we explore the puzzle of whole being happiness as professional women in our midlife, how to coach ourselves and live into the best version of ourselves, resilient, creative, and thriving, no matter what. Hello to you all, my dear friends, and welcome. We've really had quite the most extraordinary year. I started last year with a podcast on liminal space, inspired by so many of you and where you were at the so-called end of the pandemic, or perhaps more like the end of the lockdown period for many of us. And not everyone by any means. I'm thinking of our friends in China who had a whole extra year of lockdown. Anyway, I thought that hanging out in the liminal of in-between would be good for all of us, not trying to rush into creating something new or trying to go back to normal, or even think about this new normal. What I wasn't expecting for myself was a year of deep, deep grief. Many of you experienced huge losses through the pandemic. I lost access to my aging mum, and I lost my darling dog Lupin. But for most of those 2 pandemic years, I was coaching you. And my deep grief began in February with the suicide of a dear old friend. Went through to November with the shocking death of the most special young man of 16 years old. An absolutely tragic year. And in between these 2 special people, 23 of you, my clients, also lost someone from their inner family circle. Now, for those who know me well, my darling mum, she has just also died at 92, bedridden and unable to communicate since the start of the pandemic years. So this is the tragedy. I'm sitting here recording this at 5 a.m. because I'm flying to Italy to attend the World Happiness Summit. And yet, exactly a week ago, my darling mum died. This is what the conversation is for me at the moment, and has been over the last 3 years, really. It's what's been unfolding for me, and it's becoming clearer, is how do we as midlife women hold death and happiness together? Thinking about this actually started about 8 years ago with my father's death and decline from dementia, mum's decline over the last 4 years, and the conversations we've had together about aging and dying and God and divinity, as well as my forays into understanding the concept of the Buddhist Bardo states. And it's picked up more and more as I coach so many of you through these years of transitions and endings and new chapters, profound changes. Now this year, that's why I'm going to Italy. I am in the middle of my master's in happiness studies, which is delicious, by the way. And I want to have these conversations with you about death and happiness, how they are intertwined, as my way to honor my mum. This is my sweet spot. It is what's been unfolding these last 3 years, and what's been set in motion by the contemplation of the podcast of Series 3, the current thread on InterBeing. So please, if you'd like to join me in conversations about how death and happiness are so interwoven and so essential to each other, offline or here on the podcast, please drop me a note. Also, if this is the first time you've come across me and all of this is super new to you, you might want to listen to the introductory episode of Series 3, 3.0, as well as the earlier episode of the Liminal Space 2.31. And honestly, if you are struggling at the moment, please take a moment, have a listen to an episode I recorded at the start of the pandemic that's so good for helping ourselves through any difficult times. That's episode 1.35, and it's called COVID. Keep calm and coach yourself. I've been thinking about InterBeing these last few months. What it really means, where it comes from, and why it's such a wonderful way to go forward in your midlife. I'll do this over a few short episodes, and I'm going to also record some meditations that I trust will bring you closer to this lived, embodied sense of InterBeing in your midlife, so that you can connect to what it can offer you and your whole being happiness. As you know, this entire podcast, my passion and my coaching is all about whole being happiness all the time. Whole being, the well-being of the whole person, bringing all parts of ourselves, all ingredients of happiness together into one whole, where everything is included. That's our sadness, that's our grief, that's our joy, everything. How we craft whole being in our midlives is much more than just a compilation of happiness ingredients, more than a scientific formula, more than multiple happiness tools that we just randomly apply to our lives to see if they increase our happiness. Instead, what lies in the middle of our midlife whole being jigsaw puzzle is the unique artwork of our individual lives, an interwoven creative play, an ever-moving, ever-changing, joyous mess of color, thoughts, shapes, smells, values, sounds, feelings. An artwork, the poetry of a life of interbeing, where everything in us and around us is interconnected. We're in relationship to and with everything. So absolutely everything about us and our midlife whole being happiness is interconnected. And it's interconnected via 3 core relationships. Now, the inspiration for this comes from poet David Whyte, who I've been a fan of for years, but quite miraculously on Tuesday was here in Cape Town, and Tuesday was my birthday. So I was able to go and listen to his wisdom in the middle of such pain and sadness, and on my birthday. So our 3 core relationships, our relationship to and with ourselves, the most critical really, the one that sets the foundation for all the others. And it's usually the one that's horribly neglected by the time we reach midlife. We're in relationship with and to ourselves, our spiritual self, our physical self, our intellectual self, our emotional self, our subtle self. And let's not forget our past self, our current self, our future self, or actually all versions of ourselves, all our past selves, all the roles we play right now, and all the possibilities for our life held by our future self. Then there's our relationship to others, because if ourself is not enough to be going along with, we're also in relationship with other people. Our lover, our mother, our children, our grandchildren, our work colleagues, close friends, acquaintances, future acquaintances, past relationships. And then our relationship with and to the world. We're also in relationship to everything else outside of us, the earth and all creatures, and our role in the world, our purpose and our contribution. These 3 core relationships that lie at the very center of our midlife whole being happiness, they're the inside of our unfinished jigsaw puzzle. 3 core pathways to how to actually craft this inner picture of your jigsaw puzzle, and 3 core relationships intertwined in a life of interbeing. In the last podcast, I left you hanging with the cryptic quote, "To be is to interbe." Yes, think about that. To be is to interbe. You cannot just be by yourself alone. You have to interbe with every other thing. And the Buddha put it even more cryptically. This is because that is. It even sounds a bit like William Shakespeare's Prince Hamlet famous saying, "To be or not to be, that is the question." And I'll get to this last one in another episode because it's quite a fun brain twister for us as we think about interbeing. Now, the Urban Dictionary defines interbeing as to interdependently coexist, and Wiktionary as a state of connectedness and interdependence of all phenomena, or a being that is interconnected with others. So let's go with this for now and start off our interbeing explorations with thinking about interbeing as connectedness, about interconnectedness, but in a very deep way. If you're looking for a picture in your head to help you with getting to grips with interbeing and a basic level of interconnectedness, Russian wedding bands might be helpful. You know what I'm talking about, Russian wedding bands. You might know them as Cartier's Trinity rings. Princess Diana wore one before her marriage to Charles. It's a ring made up of 3 individual rings that inseparably interlock to create one ring. It's usually a combination of white, yellow, and rose gold. And originally, the 3 interlocking bands symbolized the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit of the Catholic Church coming together to form the Holy Trinity, the Holy Trinity of Christianity. Nowadays, they mean just about anything that's joined together, interlocked, past, present, and future, father, mother, and child, or mind, body, and spirit. Or, in your whole being happiness, your 3 core relationships, yourself, others, and beyond. Now, I could go off into one of my famous squirrel moments, especially if you're a Tolkien fan, and think about the one ring to bind them all, like Sauron's one ring and my precious. But I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. If you've never come across any Buddhist philosophy where interbeing has been contemplated in depth for 2,500 years, easiest way to think about interbeing is systems thinking. Systems thinking is a way that we can make sense of complexity in the world, a way to see how things are interconnected. So, analytical thinking breaks something down into its parts in order to understand why it works the way it does. Systems thinking does the opposite. It goes larger, looks at things as a whole and the relationships and patterns between things. It comes out of systems theory after the Second World War, but it became really popular in the mainstream with systems scientist Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization, back in, I think it was 1990. He says, we live in a world of extraordinary interdependence. One of the most popular ways of explaining this extraordinary interdependence is the butterfly effect. And if you haven't heard about this rather poetic sounding concept already, I will do a short separate session on this, as Fraser and I were having a discussion about it yesterday, and I realized that while I know what it is in principle and how it relates to interbeing, I really know very little about the law of non-locality and modern chaos theory and what it's got to do with midlife happiness. Also based on systems thinking is one of my coaching certifications, Organizational and Relationship Systems Coaching, or ORSC, which sounds like a Tolkien orc. In ORSC work, we look at 3 levels of intelligence: our emotional intelligence, understanding ourselves, our social intelligence, understanding others, and our relationship systems intelligence, understanding the systems we operate in, the groups, the teams, the communities that we're part of, so our collective intelligence. And for us to be effective in our lives, in other words, happy and successful no matter what, all 3 levels of intelligence are required. And the power is in being able to work with their interdependence. One of the most useful coaching tools we use in ORSC work to help people really grasp what systems are, to experience their interdependent and interconnected relationships, seeing themselves as a system, or their team as a system and their role in it, is the string exercise. Now, you don't need a team coaching session to be able to do this for yourself, looking at you as a system, the system of you with all the parts. Do you want to give it a try with me? Book a short coaching session with me and we can explore your inner InterBeing together. It's super easy to do online as long as we have a piece of string. If you'd like to do that, by the way, if you go on my website, Happiness-Matters.coach, in the top right-hand corner, there's a button, big yellow puzzle piece that says Coach with Julia, and you'll find some space there in my calendar. So how can taking this view expand your thinking about you and about your life and about your midlife happiness? Can systems thinking show you interesting relationships between your 3 core relationships? Can it explain how when one thing changes in one of these relationships, another aspect shifts, perhaps even something that seems totally disconnected, how the whole puzzle picture of you shifts a little bit? And this is the marvel of change and the gift that thinking about our midlife happiness as InterBeing can bring us. Now, if you think about Senge's view, we live in a world of systems ignorance, where we consistently produce suffering for each other, for other humans, and for living creatures, and which nobody intends. Can you see how essential InterBeing and living in a state of InterBeing is for your midlife whole being happiness? And what do you think now of your own emotional suffering, your pain, your grief? How neglected is your current self? How dismissed is your angry self? How dominant is your serving self? However, the idea of InterBeing is a lot older than systems thinking. InterBeing is right at the heart of Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy. From the concept of dependent origination in the Heart Sutra, the interpenetration of all things in the Flower Garland Sutra, to engaged Buddhism, deep ecology, and the Bodhisattva vow. It's been an integral piece of how Buddhist philosophy hangs life and death together. The term InterBeing itself was coined by Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk Nich Hanh. Many of you will know Tay. He died in 2022, but he was a well-known spiritual leader, poet, peace activist, and pioneer in how he taught mindfulness, global ethics, and peace. And in the West, he's often referred to as the father of mindfulness and the founder of engaged Buddhism. He had a powerful ability to take profoundly difficult concepts for us, such as no self, or no being, or dependent origination, or emptiness, and create easy ways for us to grasp them so that we can explore for ourselves the fundamental nature of reality, the nature of mind, and the nature of happiness. As he said, the point of Buddhism is to transform insight from an abstract philosophical idea into a lived reality that becomes the basis for everyday life. And if you've never come across his work, I really recommend you dig in. There's about 130 books to choose from. There's Happiness, Essential Mindfulness Practices, or Reconciliation, Healing the Inner Child, or the one I love, The Other Shore, a new translation of the Heart Sutra, which is all about InterBeing. And remember, you can find links to everything I've referred to in this episode in the show notes of this podcast, all on Happiness-Matters.coach. Tay has various wonderful ways of explaining InterBeing, ways to help us embody its meaning so that we know InterBeing for what it actually is, so that we can feel into the experience of Senge's extraordinary interconnectedness with our bodies and our emotions, and not just as a cognitive concept of interdependence. And I'll read to you directly from his own work. Take a piece of paper. If you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow, and without trees, we cannot make paper. The cloud is essential for the paper to exist. If the cloud is not here, the sheet of paper cannot be here either. So we can say that the cloud and the paper inter-are. Interbeing is a word that's not in the dictionary yet, but if we combine the prefix inter with the verb to be, we have a new verb, interbe, a cloud and the sheet of paper inter-are. And if we look into this sheet of paper even more deeply, we can see sunshine in it. If the sunshine is not there, the forest cannot grow. In fact, nothing can grow. Even we can't grow without sunshine. And so we know that the sunshine is also in this sheet of paper, and the paper and the sunshine inter-are. And if we continue to look, we can see the logger who cut the tree and brought it to the mill to be transformed into paper. And we see the wheat. We know the logger cannot exist without his daily bread, and therefore the wheat that became his bread is also in the sheet of paper. And the logger's father and mother are in it too. And when we look at it in this way, we see that without all these things, this sheet of paper cannot exist. And looking even more deeply, we can see that we are in it too. And this is not difficult to see, because when we look at a sheet of paper, the sheet of paper is part of our perception. Your mind is here, and mine is too. So we can say that everything is in here with this sheet of paper. You cannot point out one thing that is not here. Time, space, the earth, the rain, the minerals in the soil, the sunshine, the cloud, the river, the heat. Everything coexists with this sheet of paper. That is why I think the word interbe should be in the dictionary. To be is to interbe. You cannot just be by yourself alone. You have to interbe with every other thing. This sheet of paper is because everything else is. Suppose we try to return one of the elements to its source. Suppose we return the sunshine to the sun. Do you think that this sheet of paper will be possible? No. Without sunshine, nothing can be. And if we return the logger to his mother, then we have no sheet of paper either. The fact is that this sheet of paper is made up only of non-paper elements. And if we return these non-paper elements to their sources, then there can be no paper at all. Without non-paper elements like mind, logger, sunshine, and so on, there will be no paper. As thin as this sheet of paper, it contains everything in the universe in it. So that was his first explanation of clouds and paper and interbeing. Can you see now that interbeing is something more than just interconnectedness? Interconnected implies that we are separate beings connected to each other in a relationship system. Yeah? But actually we're also of each other. The three core relationships of our midlife, the relationship with ourself, with others, and the world are interconnected, but they are also inter-are. They interbe, because we are everything and everything is us. And this is how I want us to go through Series 3, deeply looking at these three core relationships as the artwork of your midlife jigsaw puzzle of whole being happiness. Interrelated, interconnected, interbeing. So until next time, let's deepen into our understanding of interbeing within the relationship with ourselves, all parts of ourselves, the system of you. Let's deepen into our understanding of interbeing in the relationship with others, how we are, how we inter-are with others. And possibly more difficult, let's deepen into our understanding with our relationship to the world. How are we, because everything that is in the world is. All the politics, yeah, all the horror, all the beauty. We inter-are a part of all of this. Now, how does this shift how you're thinking about your happiness today? If you were to change one tiny thing in your life, make a 2-degree shift, in other words, a 1% move towards whole being, a flap of a butterfly's wings. How does this change everything about you, about your relationships, and about the entire world? And so how can this evolve your lived experience of whole being happiness right now, today. Like I said, it's a mind bender, but let's sit with it. Let's enjoy this sense of connection. Every time you look at a piece of paper, let your mind connect it to your happiness journey. Every time you see a cloud, let it offer you an insight as you coach yourself. Remember, if you want to talk more about your interconnectedness, if you want to coach with me, my calendar has availabilities on Monday and Tuesdays every week. And that's every week except the next 2 weeks, because I'm going to be at the World Happiness Summit in Italy. Remember, you'll always find me on Happiness-Matters.coach on Facebook, where I'm often live, or on Instagram. And as I said, the next episodes will be an update on my current studies, all about what's happening at Oahu in Italy. That will be fun. As well as 2 rather unusual meditations to embody InterBeing, the somatic, emotional, and cognitive experience of it. And I might even do a few short sessions on the Buddhist concepts of InterBeing, and possibly why the science of happiness says relationships are the most powerful ingredient of our midlife happiness. So to all of you in these moments, and of course to my darling mum, who is the inspiration of my life and my happiness, may you be happy, my friends. May you be free. And there is no better time to coach together and to be together. Sending you much love, and I'll talk to you in Italy. Bye for now. Have fun seeing everything about happiness in the clouds.
Thank you for joining us on this Happiness Matters podcast, coaching your whole being happiness in midlife. To join Julia for more of her midlife conversations, subscribe for free to her coaching notes by email and to this podcast. Search for Happiness Matters in Midlife to find us in your favourite podcast player app. Once you're subscribed, both of these will be delivered to your device automatically. To find all of this, click the subscribe menu of our website, Happiness-Matters.coach. That's Happiness-Matters.coach. COACH. And thanks again for listening.